So you want to get into making comics, or at least I assume you do based off of clicking this video, or maybe you're just interested in the process in general of maybe getting your comic picked up. Well, I'd love to share all the key information I have for you guys on how to get your comic pitched and ready, and basically all you need to know to get like a comic series started. So first off, for those who don't know me, hi, my name's Katelyn. I am a full-time illustrator and comic artist, and I have been working to get my current series picked up for probably the last, 3 years now. So I'm on a very similar journey to you guys, but I have a lot of insight over the last few years of talking to friends that are in the industry, other industry professionals, and like publishing professionals, and just getting like a better sense of what it takes to get a comic into the professional publishing sphere, or even like self-publishing it yourself. I previously have self-published 2 different creature compendiums for Dungeons & Dragons, and I self-published my own comic back in college. So I can give you the insight on like my end of how to self-publish, but also give you a lot of insight for what to expect if you're trying to get into the professional publishing sphere. To kick this off, I'm going to start with the professional publishing sphere on if you have a comic or a series that you want to get picked up, just some things to think about going into it, or like getting ready to make your series like pitchable. And then I will go into more about like self-publishing and making it yourself and what I've learned from both of them. So the first thing we're going to cover today that is very important for your professional pitch, but can also apply to your self-publishing, is some key questions you need to ask yourself about getting into your comic. These are very important, especially to know when you're getting into the comic sphere. But first of all, how long is your series? Do you want it to be a one-shot comic? Are you wanting it to be a multiple longer series of multiple books? Because this will make a very big difference in what you're pitching. Second, what genre of series are you wanting to do? Are you wanting to do fantasy? Are you wanting to do sci-fi? It's something to think about because certain publishers gravitate towards that. So you kind of want to have that in mind before you start pitching to either agents or publishers. And finally, do you have a team or will you be working solo? This is also important to keep in mind for publishers because some publishers like to have either one individual creator that makes everything, or the creator makes most of the series, and then the publisher will assign you help to make the rest of the comic. Or there's other publishers that like if you have an established team because it saves them time from hiring and sourcing people to help you make your comic. So with these questions in mind, these are going to make a very big difference on my advice going forward because they will make a huge difference on what publisher you go for, what maybe to expect with your series or comic, and just overall, like maybe what course you can take to get your comic picked up. Okay, so first off, when I asked about your series length, if you want to do a one-shot or a longer series, this one is very important. So there's pros and cons to doing both of these, either a one-shot or a long series, but you need to go into this with a realistic expectation. Right now, the industry is only really liking one-shots. It is very hard to get a longer series picked up for a couple of reasons. A lot of the industry professionals I talk to have mentioned a lot of the time, like they pick up smaller, maybe not known artists for a longer series, and then they drop. Like comics can be a major burnout, especially for a longer series, and if you don't have a track record showing you can pull off a longer series. So the publisher may invest a lot of marketing time and energy into sourcing help for your comic, and if you only make it in like 1 or 2 volumes in like what was supposed to be a 30-volume series, they lose out on a lot of potential profit for you and for them. Like that's a thing you got to think about. The publisher is also in it to make money off of your IP. So more and more companies are kind of pulling away from those longer series. Not saying it's impossible. There are quite a few that get picked up, but you need to kind of have a proven track record to get more than one novel out. Or you have to find a very particular publisher, maybe get the right agent to go fight for you for a longer series, but it's just something to keep in mind. If it's your first comic that you're taking to a publisher, I personally would recommend just doing a one-shot. You have a much better chance of being seen and being picked up because it's a much lower gamble for them to produce one book instead of multiple books in a series. And it's a lot easier for you to create, so you can create a cohesive, one-story, one-shot comic and prove that you can make a comic. And then this is proof that you can take to other publishers and be like, hey, I finished this one shot. Maybe you guys can fund me for a 5-novel series, something like that. But there are some pros to making a longer series. For example, back in the day when I had my first comic series, it actually helped me grow a lot to have a longer form story. Basically having to draw the same characters over and over and finding new and interesting ways to put them in the panels. And then I was doing a lot of research on how to draw and write comics. All of that put together made me a better comic artist because I decided to make a multi-book series. But at least in the publishing sector, it is very hard to get a multiple book series seen or picked up. So that's kind of the pros and cons. On one side, you have the pros of doing a longer series is going to give you a lot of experience and a lot of practice, and maybe it will be a growth opportunity. But at the same time, publishers don't want a longer series. So maybe a longer series would be better for a self-publish or a webtoon. So with that though, a one-shot is usually the best way to get seen by a publisher or agent. It is very easy for someone to be sold on a cohesive single book issue that's the whole story in one thing, and you like wrap up the characters, and it could even be a teaser for potentially a longer series. So some of my friends in the industry do make that one shot, and it is a cohesive story. Like you get your beginning, middle, end, and it's kind of done. But in the future, they get picked up for more novels of that same story and those same characters because the one shot was popular. So the pros with the one shot issue, it's a much lower bar for entry for publishers to get behind your comic. It's also an easy way to get into comics and see if you like it before like maybe potentially burning out. And it's really recommended for beginner artists to do a one shot to see even if they like making comics or if they could see themselves making more than one. And I understand the cons. It's kind of like you have a bigger story and you have a certain journey that you want your characters to be on, but you can't really explore that as far as some series go within just the scope of a one shot. So the final notes for this section is I would highly recommend looking into doing one shots if you're looking to get in front of publishers, because it's been a lot easier for those to get picked up compared to a multi-book series, especially if you're new. If you are an established comic artist and you're making multiple books, I don't know why you're watching this video if you are, but if you're already making other books, it's a lot easier for established artists to get in and make those longer series. But if you're wanting to break into the industry, having a one shot is a cohesive and easy way to be like, hey, look what I did. And a publisher, it's a lot easier for them to get behind as well. Okay, second section about going to a publisher. I get this question a lot at my comic convention booths and like in online DMs and other messages of people asking, should I try to get an agent or should I go directly to the publisher? So this one is a little complicated because I've gone down both routes within these 3 years. I spent basically the whole first year after we made the pitch, pitching directly to agents. And after not getting a lot of bites after the first year, I then pitched directly to publishers. So I can give you a little insight on the pros and cons of both of those and some realistic expectations when it comes to potentially securing an agent or pitching directly to the publisher. So first off, with pitching directly to publishers, there's a few things to keep in mind. I would say these are like the top things to look into. First of all, research the publisher's website and see if they even have an open call for submissions. A few publishers that do have open calls for submission are like Dark Horse, Image, and a few other smaller publishers. But with that, they have very particular requirements that you need to meet for your pitch to even be seen. So do your research. So if you feel your comic would be best fit at like Dark Horse, go look at their submission portal, see what their requirements are. If there's a certain page count that you need to show, like if you have to have like 10 sample pages and a certain script, like see what you need per publisher. And then some publishers also won't really look at your stuff until you have a more completed series. A friend of mine in the industry shared with me that Image Comics, for example, they won't give you a serious look until you have quite a few books done if you're trying to get a bigger series picked up. So keep that in mind. You might need to finish part of your series before you can even put it in front of a publisher. Second thing with publishers, very important, do not approach them at comic conventions or email them directly. Go through the submission portal. Unless you have an agent or someone that has told you to email someone directly, then that's okay. You might have an okay barrier to come in and do that, but do not approach con staff or try to track down someone's email by being like firstname.lastname@darkhorse.com. Don't do that. Don't do that. So this is mainly due to legal issues. A lot of the submission portals have you sign off on a terms of agreement or like a disclosure agreement, basically saying like, hey, I'm giving you permission to view my stuff, but I will not come and sue if you happen to make a series that has something kind of similar to mine. Because of this legal paperwork that needs to be filed, convention staff will not take your pitch. They will not look at any of your documentation for your comic. And same with like the emails of emailing people directly. They will not look at any type of pitch submission because you have to fill out that legal paperwork for them to actually look at it. With this, though, I don't want to discourage people from just talking to industry professionals. I learned a lot of what I learned with this by just going up and asking people how they got published or talking to editors on what they need for like a good pitch. And so I really recommend you still go up and talk to them, but this is more advice of don't bring your whole pitch packet and set it on an editor's booth at a comic convention. I do not recommend that just because of the legal situation. But it does not hurt to talk to people in the industry. Sending them DMs and just asking for advice is totally okay if their DMs are open. But also don't be upset if you don't get a reply from someone. There are a lot of very kind people in the industry who are, welcome to share the information they have. But, all of us get busy. Not everyone can check a million DMs. And then my final note for making a pitch ready for a publisher, which also is going to apply to agents in this case, is making sure that you have a concise pitch document that is easy for them to digest or like has the certain chunks of information that you need. So for example, with submitting to Dark Horse and a few other agents that I had, basically they want like a small paragraph synopsis of generally what's going to happen in the plot or like the main plot points. It's kind of like an elevator pitch. So like an example is like an elevator pitch for Batman could be something like this child loses his parents to a robbery and that kind of scars him. I'm doing a bad job at the elevator pitch. And then he falls into a well with bats and then he becomes Batman and then he fights crime. Very bad elevator pitch, but it's kind of that idea of like, you want something short, sweet, concise, and that's like your pitch line. And then your synopsis is going to be a bigger paragraph that's elaborating on that pitch line. That's usually like 4 to 8 sentences long. I wouldn't go more than 2 paragraphs. And then some publishers need a full outline of saying like, this is what's going to happen, especially if you have a multiple book thing. It's like, here's what happens between these books, and here's the main key plot points that are going to happen. You don't need to go into the nitty gritty of like, they enter a store and this happens. It's more like they went and got this team member and then they go to this fight and this happens and this happens. They sometimes need a more in-depth outline. So you want those documents prepared as well. So having those different chunks of text ready so that you can reuse them in your other pitches for either agents or other publishers is really helpful to have. You might want to tailor them here and there. It's almost like a cover letter or a resume for when you're applying for jobs. Sometimes you need to tailor them and tweak them a bit to fit better with who you're pitching them to. And with that, have your artwork prepared. Have your page samples, whatever amount you need. Like I said, check the publisher submission guides. Usually it's about like 5 to 10 pages is what I've been seeing is the range for sample pages. And then finally, don't overcrowd this initial pitch document. So I have basically 2 pitch documents that exist within my scope. So I have one that's a more simple, straightforward one with basically the pitch line, the bigger synopsis, the larger outline, and then my sample pages. But then for me, and if they want more information, I made a larger PDF that has character art, what the character development's going to be, the book dimensions, how many pages I think each book is going to be, similar series that are like already published that are kind of similar to my existing series. I'll go ahead and leave a list right here of all of the different categories you can add to your bigger pitch, but this is just something to think about. You want to keep them separate because a lot of publishers or agents are just quickly reading through things and they don't have time for a 60+ page document. So you'll want to have an abbreviated one, which I will also put the list here of everything that's in my abbreviated, and then the longer pitch document where you have all of your in-depth information in case the publisher or agent wants to see more. Okay, so with the publisher out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into pitching to agents, which I personally thought pitching to agents was going to be the easier thing. But boy, pitching to publishers is way more straightforward. And what's hard is like the success rate of both is so variable. So be patient with yourself when it comes to either of these. Okay, so pitching to agents. Again, you want to have something clear and concise for them to read through, and if they need more information, you can have the bigger pitch document. But with that, every agent is a little different. So I went through an app called Query Tracker, which basically you can go through and search for agents based off of maybe the genre of book or comic that you're trying to publish, let alone if they do allow comics, like if they represent comics or not. And then that can also be dictated by region, like there's Canadian agents, there's United States agents, there's European agents. You can put that in the filters as well. And so I went through and I researched all of the agents that I could find that would fit my comic, and I pitched to them. So with that, most agents have a wish list. Now, this is the most important thing that you need to look into when pitching to agents. Every agent has a certain thing that they like to represent the most, whether it's children's books or novels or even like genres. So if you can track down their wish list, that is the best thing to give you insight on if you should pitch to them or not. On Query Tracker, a few of them have links to different like wish list websites, but sometimes you're going to have to go to the actual agent company's website, find that agent, and look onto their profile as well. Most representation companies have a whole profile page for all of their agents that go through previous works that they've represented, which is also a really good thing to look into, the wish list that they want for future publications, and then a very big important thing is if they're even open for submissions. Some of them are listed on Query Tracker as being open or other apps, but then if you go to the publisher's website, it shows that they are not open until X date, or they're not open for pitches like indefinitely. So finding that wish list and the about pages will help you immensely to not waste time on pitching to an agent that does not fit you. With that in mind as well, for trying to save you time with pitching, let me kind of break down what the process is for pitching to agents. It's very similar to publishers, but honestly, each of them is going to be a little different depending on what the agent wants. So for example, in Query Tracker, they have a form that you can fill out for the agent specifically, where you list your name, a little bit about yourself, maybe your bio, something about the book, upload your sample pages, whatever they ask for can be in this form. This is usually a pretty straightforward way to get your information to agents, but I have had quite a few that I don't get any replies to. So just be aware that unlike emails, and even emails you might not get a reply to, but Query Tracker, I feel you might not hear anything ever on some pitches. You might pitch to the void and you don't know if they've seen it or anything, but it is an easy way for them to compartmentalize what they need per pitch, and then they can review it on their back end. But some publishers require that you do an email or some type of other written documentation or form that's on an external website. So when it comes to emails, a query letter is very important. Sometimes you need it for Query Tracker as well, but basically the query letter is you introducing yourself, your background and experience, and then a bit about your series and why you went to them for representation. So I will put right here a general breakdown of what should be in your query letter per section and kind of like a little bit of a rough draft. This is generally what you want to aim for when it goes to emailing them. And then you can also print out and use this letter if certain agents are requiring physical submissions. Physical submissions are not as common anymore. I would say most of them are all either over email or forms, but just in case you need it, you have it ready. So I would try to keep it on one page just in case you do need to print it and send it physically. Plus it makes it smaller and concise for the agent to look through, and it's not like a huge novel. It's supposed to be a quick, concise letter, something easy for them to read and get through. And then my final notes for this section, I want to list off the pros and cons of pitching to publishers versus agents and what to expect on either side. I know I touched on a few things throughout, but I wanted to give you guys a final list so you know what to expect. So the pro of pitching to agents, if you are successfully picked up by an agent, it is awesome to have someone go to bat for you to a publisher, especially if the publisher doesn't have open submissions to the public. Agents are a perfect doorway into getting to publishers because they have direct contacts and can get your work in front of the editors or whoever is in charge of like processing and looking through new series to be picked up by those publishers. They're also great depending on your type of agent that they might be able to secure you work within the comic industry, even if it isn't for your own series. So if you do look for an agent to represent you for illustration work, or like helping with like color or inking for pages. Again, they can set you up with jobs as they see them, or even reach out to their publisher contacts to be like, hey, I have this artist. Do you have a project that they could work on? So having someone go to bat for you is awesome. But the con with having an agent is it's very hard to get an agent. Most of the industry professionals that I have talked to who did secure an agent were either, one, approached by the agent through social media to have them be represented, which also is a little iffy because there's so many scam emails out there nowadays. So you just have to do your research if you do get reached out to by an agent directly. And then there are a few that applied for a general agency and then were assigned to their particular agent, but it's kind of a gamble. It's very much like winning the lottery, just based on like you need the right agent who likes your work and style and can see potential for like projects that you can be on. So yeah, pros is a direct line contact to a publisher if you have an agent. Con, it's very hard to get an agent. I think I pitched my comic series and even myself just as an illustrator. I think I'm cruising around 125 agents over basically 2 years. And I've had 2 bites that wanted extra information and then said no. So keep that in mind for a realistic expectation with trying to get an agent for representation. Okay, and then pros and cons of pitching directly to the publisher. So pro, it's really cool that certain publishers have an open submission portal and you can just work directly with the publisher to basically process your paperwork. With an agent, there's a potential that you'll be paying a percentage of your contract to them so then they can sustain their job. But if you're working directly with the publisher, you have a better chance of keeping as much of the revenue as possible. Another pro is you can look into the terms of those publishers through the contracts directly. Agents will talk to you about your contract and work with you on it as well. But it is nice to be able to do your own research on the publishers and see if they'll even let you keep your IP or if they will take a portion of the copyright. Most of the publishers do show that you get to keep your IP, like Dark Horse and Image Comics and Oni Press. All of them let the creator keep their property to their comic series and their characters. But that's a whole other thing. We'll go into like legalese in a little bit, but that's another pro of being able to research directly into who you're pitching to. And the biggest con with pitching to publishers is everyone can do it. If there is a direct submission portal, you are fighting a sea of potential people that are also pitching to the publisher. I don't want to say that to be discouraging, but it's something to keep in mind that there's a chance you will not hear anything from any publishers. I had a lot of great correspondence from publishers though, so it's like kind of a catch-22. Certain bigger ones like Dark Horse and Image, they never got back to me. I didn't really get any type of reply or correspondence to say why maybe my pitch wasn't picked up. But then other smaller publishers were amazing and they gave me all of the insight into maybe not having a longer series or if I had a one-shot. Different things like that really helped put into focus like what these publishers were looking for. So that's also nice. If you are able to pitch to smaller publishing agencies or even get feedback from the bigger ones, it can give you a lot of insight into maybe how to fix your pitch or what to adjust to go back and pitch again. One final note with trying to go the mainstream route with going with publishers or with agents is it's all subjectable to how the industry is at this moment or what they're looking for. Your series might be a banger. It might be the coolest fantasy or sci-fi or whatever type of series that they've seen. But if the industry is showing either there's too many of a similar genre to that, or maybe they're just not looking for that right now, it might get rejected. So that's what's the hardest part about going through a mainstream source is you're kind of at the whim of what they think will succeed. I've heard of so many authors and comic artists that had put their work in front of a ton of different publishers and people just to get rejected. But then when they were seen by one final publisher who believed in their vision, it did great. So sometimes you just need to keep in mind you need to get it in front of the right people at the right time. So basically don't give up. Just keep repitching it, tweaking it, trying again, getting it in front of new people, getting it in front of new publishers, and just keep doing your research. It's a long game. Just be prepared if you're trying to get in front of a publisher or an agent. You are in it for the long haul. It is not just a thing that you do for a year or so and then you're done. So keep that in mind. Those are all of my main notes for trying to go the mainstream route with either doing a publisher or an agent, and giving you some feedback on how to basically build a pitch and get that ready. So let's dive into self-publishing and the wonderful world of that. It comes with so many pros and cons about doing your own thing and going your own route, but I'm going to break down for you what I've had success with and what advice I can give to you for self-publishing. So one of the first things that you need to be ready for when it comes to self-publishing is having some type of consistency, whether you're posting on your own website, on one of the webcomic hosting things like Tapas or Webtoons, or even like on Instagram or Twitter. You'll want to have a generally consistent upload schedule. This is how your comic will grow and be seen by as many people as possible. We basically live in the day and age where social media is run on an algorithm. So if you're like, I am going to make a comic page every Friday, it's going to post every Friday, you need to stick with that for as long as you can, because your fans are going to start expecting that and want to see it. And that's the best way to have some type of growth, is having a generally consistent upload schedule. Some artists I follow just do every 2 weeks, and it's just in a range of like, it could be any day within those 2 weeks, or it's very specific every day of a certain day of the week. And with that, you want to have a buffer. So I would highly recommend being basically quite a few months in advance of your production schedule. So then you have that time in case an emergency happens or something else goes awry with the production of your comic. You want to have that bit of a buffer to work with. So consistency is going to be the key if you're trying to go for the Webtoons or Tapas route. But with that too, I want to propose another thing you need to keep in mind with posting your comic online. You need to really check the terms and services of any of the publishers you look into for any of your IPs. This part I am not a full professional on, but I have heard many woes through other artists that I follow on Twitter, especially when it came to the recent new Webtoons contracts. They seemed a little iffy. So if you do get into posting on Webtoons or Tapas or other sites, it wouldn't hurt to do research on what they control. Like, do they keep your IP? Are you signing away the rights to use the artwork in their advertisement? All of that is something to look into. It's different also depending on what layer you are within their creative program. For example, Webtoons has the Canvas program, where it's kind of just like introducing your series to the Webtoons platform, but it isn't like a hard signed contract one. But that one still does have terms and conditions for uploading to their website. So you just want to look into that to make sure it aligns with what you want from your series. But then it's also hard because, yes, those are bigger platforms that you can get more eyeballs on it compared to your own personal website. There are other third-party websites like Comic Fury, and there's so many others that you can list your comic on that give you better IP usage. And some of them even link to your direct website. So you can list the comic on their third-party website, but have it linked to your website for people to actually read it. So you totally could make your comic 100% online and have it more of a Webtoon-based comic. Totally fine. But if you're interested in how to print and produce your own comics, that's what we're going to cover next. So I have done multiple self-publishing projects through Kickstarter. Like I said, I did my first 2 Creature Compendium novels through Kickstarter 100%. And then I did fund my original comic Jade Dragon on Kickstarter as well. And I've personally had a lot of success with it. I really like doing self-publishing in this route, which is another thing that you could keep in mind for your comic. So with this route, you could publish it as a webtoon and then convert it to a book later on to print and publish, or you can just go straight into, I'm going to produce this book and then pitch it to the internet to try to get some people to back it on like Kickstarter or Indiegogo. With that too, you want to make sure to slowly build hype as you're getting ready to launch the Kickstarter, maybe posting mini comics about the characters, maybe comic previews, maybe even making a Patreon that shows like every page of the comic or something, you know, different ways to get people interested in the series and the characters. I have a couple key points that I do suggest doing if you do go this route of self-publishing that you should keep in mind before launching your Kickstarter or Indiegogo. One of the things you want to keep in mind before launching your Kickstarter is get your timeline set of when you're going to finish production, when you're going to be able to send it to your backers, and make sure you have that written out for them to view. Hiccups do happen though, so as long as you keep your backers informed and let them know what is happening in the process and maybe what the holdup is, they will be more comfortable with waiting for your final product, but you want to try to stick to that timeline as best as you can. I also recommend for comics, try to have the thing done, or at least very close to done, before you even put it on Kickstarter. There's a catch-22 with this, because if you are hiring a team or asking for help, it might be stuck on an IOU situation, or you're paying out of pocket to help produce your comic while you wait for the Kickstarter funds. And that's for like if you had it ready before the Kickstarter. But then the flip side is if you get the funding through Kickstarter and then start production, your backers are going to have to wait a much longer time to get your final product. So whichever route you do choose to go with creating your comic, just make sure that you let your backers know what to expect when it comes to when they'll receive your final comic. A second thing I would look into before you launch any type of Kickstarter or Indiegogo is look into your print supplier and find who you want to use to make the comic. You want to figure out what the base price is going to be per book. You can usually put a general estimate of page numbers and paper type, so then you can get a good idea of how much this comic is going to be to print per. And then how much is it going to cost to have it shipped to you, depending on where you're ordering it from. There are local suppliers in quite a few major cities that will produce like staple-bound comics, but a lot of the hard-bound books or soft-cover books that have the glue edge usually require a lot more production and will be more expensive. And probably will be shipped from other places. Like my books, for example, are produced in China, so that takes a lot more time to be shipped to me, and it is much more expensive to ship them to me, depending on how many I order. Once you get that general price range figured out, that will help inform you on how much you should charge for each Kickstarter tier, so then you do have enough to cover the production of the book, potentially profit to pay the people that helped you, and then the shipping costs that are involved with shipping each of these books. It's not going to be perfect every time. My first 2 Kickstarters, I grossly underestimated. So it's okay if you make mistakes, but just be ready to have some type of fallback in case you need a little extra money for like shipping, or maybe a certain production cost of something was a little more expensive. And then finally, my big advice for selling your own personal comic and self-publishing is you need to be ready to get in front of people to show off your comic or your series. Whether that's online through social media and saying like, hey, this is what my book's about and this and that, and posting that frequently for people to see, or going to comic conventions and physically selling your book at a table. This is the best way to get it in front of your potential fans and other readers. I personally have found the most success with going in person to comic conventions. It's much easier to talk to and connect to people and get excited about your series in front of them. And then they'll feel that and see how passionate you are about your characters and your series. And I feel it's just so much easier to connect with people over a table at a convention. But some people, it's way better to do something online, like either like a fun Q&A of characters and doodling them, doing different things, or like having live like flip through readings, or drawing the pages live on Twitch. There's a lot of different ways to connect to your readers when doing self-publishing route. So with all of that in mind, I want to lay out the pros and cons of doing self-publishing, so then you know what you're getting into as well. I know I covered a lot just now, but I'll kind of do some footnotes of basically what's the best and worst things that come with self-publishing. So the main pros I see with self-publishing is, first of all, you get to keep your IP. You have full control over your intellectual property and the series in general. You get to decide which merch you make. You get to decide when you publish and when you print things. Like, you have full control over the series. So you can choose to publish a page or two every couple weeks, or you can choose to have it printed, or you can choose to make merchandise. And you will always have control of your characters and your world. When you go through an editor, agent, or publisher, there will potentially be feedback on what they want to change, or if they feel certain things would be better for the series. While I feel this can be helpful for developing a series and can lead to an even better one, sometimes you might lose certain parts of it that you really jived with. So, doing self-publishing, you get to control everything. With that too, you don't have to wait for the perfect time to publish your comic. You can just make it and do it when you're ready. You aren't stuck waiting for the whim of the publishing industry to be like, oh yes, it is now sci-fi time, let's publish sci-fi books. You can just do it when you're ready and make the series you want to make whenever you want to make it. With that too, you can do what content rating you want as well. For example, my comic is more of an adult comic, but right now, young adult and middle school age comics are the most popular. So it is much harder for my adult-based comic to be seen by a publisher when most publishers and agents are wanting to get something for the young adult or younger. But if you self-publish, you can just make it yourself and make it to the content rating that you want it to be. Another pro is you get to keep basically your revenue fully. Like certain publishing websites like Webtoons and Tapas, they do take some of your AdSense, but you get to keep a bigger chunk of that portion. With going through a traditional publisher, you usually will get a stipend and a percentage of royalties, but that will really range on the publisher. But with self-publishing and how much of an indie space the internet has grown to be, you can make your comic on like Patreon and have direct access to your fan base that wants to pay for your comic. And then to loop back to what I was saying with not having to wait for the whims of the publishing industry, I think the final pro with self-publishing is this is your chance to basically create the series and publish what you want for publishers to then discover later. There's quite a few webtoon artists that I have followed for a really long time that have like locked in Viz contracts or are now publishing through different publishers. Like Lore of Olympus is a big one that you see all the time that now has physical books. And it's just because they were publishing on a worldwide stage of an online platform and they grew to a certain size to then be approached by publishers. So if you do want to go for the traditional publishing route, this might be the first step into getting there, is publishing it yourself and then going into that route. And then before we jump into the cons, here is one final pro/con that I want to cover. And it's basically when you self-publish, you are your own boss at the end of the day. So the pro with that, like I said in the earlier ones, you get to make exactly what you want. You get to draw what you want. You get to release on the schedule that you want. But the con is sometimes that is very hard for different people to maintain. When you have like an editor or someone that is checking on your series more frequently and maybe has certain deadlines and timelines, it's just like a day job where you have to hit a certain timeline for a project. Like I said, there's pros and cons to that of like some publishers have crazy expectations on how fast the artwork can be done. But then it does help some people to have that timeline because sometimes when you're your own boss, it's hard to stick to a production schedule for a comic. So what I recommend with trying to get into being your own boss with producing a comic is try to figure out what your pace is before you start dedicating to releasing the comic. Especially because most of us self-publishers have a day job on the side with our comic. I just recently transitioned over to being full-time and I have been doing these books on the side for 10 years now. Yeah, it's been a really long time. But with that, I had to figure out realistically what my schedule would be if I needed to produce X amount by a certain date. So kind of experiment with what works for you, what type of timeline, what type of organization. Try to figure out what will work best for you in the long run when doing your own self-publishing. Okay, so let's jump into the cons of self-publishing. I don't want to deter anyone with these cons, but it's just more things to keep in mind. So first of all, with self-publishing, especially if you are wanting to print and produce your own comic, it is expensive, especially depending on if you're doing black and white, color, bound, staple book. There's a lot of things to keep in mind, but at the end of the day, it does cost money. Or if you have like a team or people who are helping you, you need to have the discussion early on if there is payment involved or if you're all in it together to try to get it to a successful point. Work per hour can add up and be very expensive, and publishing and printing costs can be very expensive. And even worse now, shipping costs have gone up substantially. Just to give you an example, when I published my first creature compendium and I sent it to Australia, which is usually the most expensive place to ship, it ranged from like $15 to $25 to ship it internationally in 2019. This year, almost the same weight book, almost the same size box, it ranged from $40 to $60 to ship the book to Australia. So things will be expensive because you don't have a publisher that's covering the cost of the print, and you also don't have big publisher discounts on shipping, because quite a few of them have some type of discount when it comes to shipping out books or mass quantities of product. And then the final con, which could also be potentially a pro, is going along with being your own boss with self-publishing. You are in charge of basically getting this series as far as it can go. Yes, it is up to algorithms and if people are able to see it and read it, but also at the end of the day, you are the marketer for your comic, which sometimes is the hardest part. It is up to you to make either the Instagram Reels or TikToks or videos or social posts to show off your comic and try to garner a fan base or readers. And at the end of the day, a lot of us creatives don't like doing the numbers game. That is probably the biggest con when it comes to trying to make a steady income off of self-publishing. And it's something I have to keep in mind too. Like, I have to publish on multiple platforms to get my illustrations seen. And once my comic starts picking up, I have to publish basically advertisement for it. When you have a publisher, they might help with quite a bit of marketing. Having those extra people there to help you get your series out there more is a huge help. So this one, like I said, it's kind of a pro and con, because a pro is you get to control how your series is marketed, how you want it to be presented, and basically what fun artwork and advertisements you want to do. But the con is you're making all of it. You have to create the ads, you have to program them, you have to get them in front of the right people. And it's same with like the Kickstarters and such. You have to set up the back end and everything. And actually that leads into one more, I guess, final con, which is fulfillment with self-publishing. It is a lot of work to fulfill and send out a Kickstarter. I do not want to undersell that. Even if you get 100 or less orders, it's still a lot of work. I am very fortunate that I have wonderful friends and family that come over and help me pack whenever I do big Kickstarter funding. Basically, I'm like, hey, I'll buy you guys dinner if you come help me for a couple of hours and we can knock out packing these books. But if you're doing it solo, it takes a lot longer. I had to do that even for a pin fulfillment Kickstarter, and it took me like a week to pack them all by myself. And that's another thing to keep in mind. It is quite a lot of work to fulfill and send out Kickstarters or Indiegogos, but it is really a cool thing to be like, I did this, I made this book, I funded it. This is my product, and I had the wonderful support of a community. Like, that is really freaking cool too at the same time. So yeah, that's kind of the gist of getting into comics, whether you do a publisher or an agent or you self-publish. I hope this was insightful. Like I said, I'm on a very similar journey to you guys. I'm just kind of a few years ahead of like talking to a bunch of industry professionals. And then I was pitching and talking to a bunch of agents and other people for years, so I wanted to share that information with you guys. So then you could be a few steps ahead compared to where I was when I started. I really want to make these videos and similar things to give other creatives a leg up when it comes to this type of insight, because it's kind of hard to track down this information. And I know I want to do another one on comic conventions and like setting up booths, because a lot of these things seem like such a high barrier for entry. But once you break it down and see what you really need to think about when going into these different things, it's not too scary. It might be scary at first, but I hope that this video helped break it down and gave you some insight into what to expect when getting into comics or trying to publish your own series. So I wish you all luck with publishing your own comic. If you have any other further questions and want me to do a follow-up video, post them down in the comments below. I know there's so many things that come to publishing comics, and I tried to cover like the main things that I know, but I would love to answer any questions you guys have further about trying to get into the comic industry. So again, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you found it insightful, because I like making these videos because I wish younger me had similar videos to this when I was starting on my art career. So that's what I'm hoping I'm doing for you. So I'm hoping this was insightful and you learned something from it and have a better insight on what to expect when getting into comics. But either way, thank you guys again so much for stopping by, checking out this video. If you have other things you want me to cover, like doing comic conventions, booth setups, social media. There's a lot of things that come to being an artist online. Let me know down below if there's like another instructional video you would like to see, or like basically questions you have about being an artist or comic artist or convention artist. Let me know in the comments. I also want to do a quick shout out to my patrons. Thank you guys so much for supporting me on this art journey and supporting this channel and my work. If you guys would like to get behind the scenes artwork of stuff that I create, we also have a print club and a sticker club where you get stuff in the mail sent to you of my original artwork. You can go check out my Patreon. You all are helping me make this thing a reality of being able to make my own comic series and make my own artwork. So if you want to support me, check out my Patreon. And one final word before I do the send off. This is one thing that I also needed to hear, but keep making comics, keep making your stories, and make what you want to make. You are the only person who can make the thing that you are drafting. No one else is going to make Fox Among Hounds for me, and no one else is going to make the series like I want to make it. So at the end of the day, I have to do it, and I encourage all of you to just go for it. No matter your skill level, no matter where you are in your artistic journey, just do it. Just make comics. Trust me, it's the best thing you can do for yourself is just get in there and create. There are so many shoulda, coulda, woulda's in the world of like, I could have made this years ago, or I should have done this. So just take the day and go for it. Seize your opportunity and make the thing you want to make. So with that little motivational speech, thank you guys again so much for stopping by and checking out this video. Again, I hope this was insightful. Subscribe if you want to follow along on my art journey or want to see other informational videos that I'll bring to you in the future. But yeah, thanks again, guys, and I'll see you all next time. Bye, everybody.